Imagine this. Four men in tactical vests roll up to your house, shove your daughter, and pretend to be law enforcement. The problem? I'm a retired Navy SEAL. They thought they could scare us into tearing down a flower trellis. Instead, I put three of them flat on the ground before the cops even arrived. And when the truth came out, the HOA president who sent them ended up in handcuffs, facing years in prison. She wanted a war with my family, but she forgot who she was up against. I never thought peace would be the hardest thing to find after years of war. I had given everything to my country, lived in shadows, fought in silence, and buried memories I'd never share with anyone. When I retired from the Navy SEALs, I promised myself one thing, that I'd build a quiet life for my daughter, Emily. She was 20 now, strong-willed, sharp-tongued, and the only reason I bothered getting up every morning. Together, we moved into a neat suburban neighborhood where the lawns were clipped short, the fences gleamed white, and everyone waved like they had nothing to hide. I believed we had finally found peace. I couldn't have been more wrong. The letters started first, paper threats folded neatly inside my mailbox. They came from the Homeowners Association, claiming Emily's flower trellis was an unauthorized structure. A trellis, wooden slats, painted soft white, supporting vines Emily had planted with her own hands. Half the houses on our block had something bigger in their yards, yet somehow ours was the problem. At first, I ignored the notes. I'd fought bigger battles than paperwork and didn't want to stir the waters. But then came the fines. $200, then $400, escalating threats of liens against my home. That was when I realized this wasn't about flowers or rules. It was about power. So I went to their meeting, a beige-painted clubhouse, rows of folding chairs, bars, the smell of stale coffee and smug superiority. At the head of the table sat Karen Mitchell, the HOA president. Her sunglasses never left her face, even indoors. She wore a smile that wasn't a smile at all, more like a challenge. Beside her was Mark Benson, their so-called security director. He strutted like a sheriff, puffed up chest and squinting eyes, but to me he looked more like a man who missed his chance to matter. I laid out my case calmly, photos in hand, proof that other homes had identical trellises. Karen didn't even glance at them. She waved her hand like I was wasting her time. "Rules are rules, Mr. Hayes," she said. "If you can't comply, perhaps this isn't the right community for you." That was when Emily stood. My daughter, fire in her veins, chin lifted high. "You're targeting my dad because you think you can push him around," she snapped. "He's done more for this country than you ever will." The room went silent. I could feel the eyes on us, neighbors shifting in their seats. Karen's lips thinned to a cruel smile. Benson leaned forward across the table, his voice a low growl meant only for us. "Careful, little girl. You don't want to make enemies here." I told myself that was the end of it, that the threats were bluster, empty words from petty tyrants, but I should have known better. In the military, I'd learned one truth above all. When someone shows you their intent, you listen. I didn't, and 2 days later, my daughter paid the price. Emily came home shaken, her face pale, her hands trembling as she held the leash of our golden retriever. She told me about the black SUV that rolled up beside her. 4 men stepped out in tactical vests, patches stitched with the words HOA compliance. They weren't cops, but they wanted her to think they were. One shoved her shoulder, another barked orders. "Tell your dad the trellis comes down, or next time it won't just be a warning." My blood ran cold. They had laid hands on my daughter, on my property. That wasn't HOA enforcement, that was assault. And worse, it was a declaration of war. The moment Emily finished telling me what had happened, I felt a familiar switch flip inside me. It was the same cold focus I'd carried through countless missions overseas, the one that stripped away fear and hesitation, leaving only calculation. 4 men, black SUV, fake uniforms, pretenders, not professionals. Still, they had crossed the line no one crosses. They put their hands on my daughter. I told Emily to stay close, to call 911 if things escalated. Then I waited. And sure enough, fate didn't make me wait long. That evening, the SUV rolled up again, tires crunching against the gravel of my driveway. The same 4 men piled out, tactical vests gleaming under the porch light. The patchwork letters across their chests spelled HOA Compliance Unit, crooked and peeling as if ironed on in some garage. They tried to swagger, but I saw through them instantly. Their stances were sloppy, their hands hovered too close to their belts. Amateurs playing soldier. One of them puffed his chest, jabbing a finger toward Emily, who stood behind me with her phone raised, recording. "You think your little princess can cry to Daddy and get away with ignoring our orders?" He sneered. I didn't answer. Instead, I smiled. Not the kind of smile that reassures. It was the smile of a man who had walked through darker valleys and come out alive. A seal's smile. It froze him just long enough. The first man swung wild, a haymaker so telegraphed I saw it before his shoulder twitched. I ducked under, hooked his arm, and used his momentum to drop him hard onto the gravel. The air rushed out of him in a groan. The second charged like a linebacker, arms wide. I pivot. Ted slammed an elbow into his ribs and drove his face against the SUV's hood. The sound of metal and bone colliding echoed through the night. The third pulled a baton, cheap plastic, not police issue. He raised it high, but my hand clamped down on his wrist before he could bring it down. I twisted hard until his fingers popped open and the baton clattered to the ground. A straight palm strike to his chest folded him backward, air gone from his lungs. That left one. He hesitated, eyes flicking from his groaning buddies to Emily's phone, which caught every second. I stepped toward him slowly, deliberately. My voice was calm, low, and steady. "You've got two choices. Drop the act and walk away, or keep pretending you're law enforcement and spend the night in a real jail." For a heartbeat, I thought he'd be foolish enough to test me. Then survival instinct kicked in. He bolted, diving into the SUV, slamming the door, and screeching off into the night, leaving his so-called squad scattered across my driveway. Emily whispered behind me, her voice trembling with awe. "Dad, you just took down 4 men like it was nothing." I rested a hand on her shoulder, keeping my eyes on the moaning heap of bodies. Because they weren't trained. They wanted to scare us, not fight us. But impersonating cops, that's a felony. And they just made the worst mistake of their lives. Minutes later, the real deputies arrived, sirens painting the night in red and blue. 2 of the men were still groaning where I'd left them. Emily handed over the footage, every shove, every threat, every second of their humiliation. I gave my statement, calm and clipped, as the deputies cuffed the 3 who hadn't managed to crawl away. One deputy, young and wide-eyed, looked at me as they hauled the imposters off. "Sir, did you really do this alone?" I shrugged. Old habits die hard. But as I watched the SUV vanish into the distance, my gut told me this wasn't over. Karen Mitchell and Mark Benson had started a war, and tonight had only been the first battle. The deputies didn't have to press hard. Once those imposters were separated, they started singing like canaries. One tried to play tough, but the bruises blooming across his ribs made him wince with every breath. Another kept whining, repeating how Karen promised we wouldn't get caught. That name confirmed everything I already suspected. Karen Mitchell, HOA president, tyrant in designer sunglasses, was behind this. I stood on the porch rail, arms crossed, watching it unravel. Emily was beside me, clutching her phone as if it were a shield. The evidence she captured was ironclad, and we both knew it. Deputy Morales, a steady man with years in his eyes, returned to us with his notebook. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "you were right. These guys aren't cops, not even close. They admitted HOA President Karen Benson hired them, said she wanted to teach you a lesson." Emily scoffed, fury flashing in her eyes. "She wanted them to put their hands on me. That's not a lesson. That's assault." Morales nodded grimly. "And it won't sit lightly in court." He flipped a page and added, "Assault against a minor, impersonating federal officers, criminal trespass. They stacked charges on themselves the moment they stepped onto your property. We'll make sure the DA has everything he needs." I knew the codes by heart. Years of military service had drilled law and order into me as much as tactics. Under 18 U.S. Code 912, impersonating a federal officer is good for 3 years behind bars. Add Texas Penal Code 22. 01 for assault, Penal Code 30. 05 for trespass, and suddenly Karen's little intimidation stunt carried decades of combined prison time. But the real shock came half an hour later. The deputies rolled up to Karen's pristine 2-story home, lights flashing, radios crackling. Neighbors peeked from their blinds as the woman who ruled over their lawns and mailboxes was escorted out in handcuffs. Her voice screeched across the cul-de-sac. "This is a misunderstanding. I was protecting the community. He's dangerous. He's military." She jabbed her finger toward me. manicured nail trembling in rage. The deputy shoved her into the back of the cruiser. Emily's phone was steady, capturing every second. Dangerous? She muttered under her breath. The only danger around here was her. By nightfall, the neighborhood gossip mill had ignited. Phones buzzed, group chats exploded, and by morning, everyone knew Karen Mitchell had been arrested for hiring thugs to rough up a 20-year-old girl. The HOA board convened an emergency meeting the very next day. No debate, no theatrics, just a unanimous vote. Karen was stripped of her title in less than 5 minutes. Her empire of petty fines, veiled threats, and cheap intimidation collapsed like a house of cards. The enforcers didn't fare any better. At their arraignment, they looked less like the swaggering tough guys who had strutted onto my property and more like schoolboys caught stealing candy. Shackled, heads hung low, the reality of prison time written across their faces. The DA was clear. Impersonating officers, trespassing, and assault. The evidence was airtight. That evening, Emily asked me quietly, "Dad, do you think Karen will really go to jail?" I looked her straight in the eye. Actions have consequences. She wanted a war, and she forgot who she was up against. The law doesn't bend just because you're HOA president. I meant it. But even then, a nagging instinct whispered that Karen wasn't done fighting. Some people don't know how to surrender, even when the cuffs click shut. I thought the arrest would be the end of it. Karen was in cuffs, her enforcers facing prison, and the neighborhood had turned against her. But I've lived long enough to know that some enemies don't quit just because the odds are stacked against them. They thrash harder when they're cornered. And Karen Mitchell was nothing if not desperate. The week after her arrest, I noticed cars slowing in front of my house, strangers taking pictures. Anonymous notes appeared in my mailbox, cowardly scraps of paper with words like dangerous veteran and unstable soldier. It was a smear campaign, a last attempt to make me the villain. Emily found one note crumpled under the trellis and stormed into the house, shaking with fury. "She's trying to twist everything," she said. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let her try. Truth cuts deeper than lies." And the truth came down harder than either of us expected. The DA expanded charges against Karen after reviewing Emily's footage and the imposter's confessions. Conspiracy to commit assault under Texas Penal Code 22. Solicitation of impersonating a public servant, a federal felony under 18 U.S. Code 912. Trespass. Misuse of emergency services for her bogus 911 claims. Every move she'd made, every step of her little war, stacked into a tower of crimes that even the best lawyer couldn't topple. The day of her court hearing, the neighborhood gathered like it was a parade. People whispered in the courthouse halls, neighbors who once cowered before her now openly smirking at her downfall. Emily and I sat quietly in the back, her phone still clutched in her hand like a talisman. When Karen was brought in, she no longer looked like the queen of the cul-de-sac. The sunglasses were gone, the manicured nails chipped. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for allies. She found none. Even Mark Benson, her loyal security director, had flipped to save himself, testifying that Karen masterminded everything. Betrayal from within. Poetic justice. The judge listened, stone-faced, as the charges were read aloud. One by one, the weight of her actions filled the courtroom like a tide she couldn't stop. Emily squeezed my hand when the sentence came down. Years behind bars, fines heavy enough to drain her savings, and a restraining order that would keep her far from us forever. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not the fleeting rush of victory, but a deep, steady calm. I had fought battles in deserts and jungles, watched enemies crumble and allies fall, but this fight, this was the one that mattered. Protecting my daughter, proving that no uniform, no title, no cheap badge could put fear in our home. That evening, Emily and I sat on the porch again. The same chair, the same trellis glowing in the twilight. The vines she had planted curled upward, stubborn and alive, untouched by the chaos we'd endured. She leaned her head against my shoulder, her voice soft. She tried to break us. I nodded, eyes on the horizon. Instead, she broke herself. For the first time in a long while, I believed we'd finally found the peace I had been searching for. And this time, no one, not an HOA president, not hired thugs, not anyone, was going to take it from us.